from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased. Joining me from the US, Justin Dixon. Justin, thank you very much for being here with me today. I really appreciate your time. The way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests. Introduce yourself, so a little bit more about you, your journey, what you're currently up to. Just as a kind of teaser for the audience, we're gonna talk about a lot of topics today about hiring, especially for startups and PE firms. We're gonna talk a little bit about the AI role here and some other topics as well related to the mindset and financial freedom. So, Justin, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. There's a lot to cover, it sounds like, but just a little bit about me. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and after college, I kind of fell into the whole recruiting world. I didn't really know that was a career path or a job that was out there, and I haven't fallen out of it. So I've been doing recruiting for companies, both internally and as an agency, for over 18 years, which is kind of scary to say that I've been doing it for that long. But I started my own recruiting firm, Hire Tomorrow, back in January of 2020. I quit a very stable head of recruitment job for a wealth management firm in Philadelphia right before COVID was really starting. And so starting a recruiting business right as COVID pandemic was starting in January of 2020 was not the right time to start, not perfect timing because nobody was really hiring throughout most of 2020. But the benefit of that was my wife ended up getting a job in Austin, Texas, which is where we live now, with a cybersecurity startup. So during COVID, we moved down here to Austin, and that got me plugged into the kind of private equity and startup world, both here and throughout the US. So primarily from a recruitment standpoint, I recruit for, I get brought in by the private equity firm, typically right around the acquisition point. And I help them kind of plug any C-level holes in the company they just acquired. And then I will kind of stay with that company throughout their journey and help them hire any kind of key roles that they need, whether they're leadership or individual contributors. So there's a lot to unpack from that. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun to kind of just get to see the startup world, both from the private equity firm side and just kind of from the portfolio, just the actual company side. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for being here again, Justin. So just quickly, you mentioned about, shifting from head of recruiting to founder. So what was kind of the hardest mindset shift that you had to make? Like, okay, I'm also the founder. I'm myself an entrepreneur. So how this affected, your way of thinking?
Yeah, I would say it was probably a 2-year journey. So I was, like I said, I was kind of growing up in a small town. And so my financial learnings and kind of teaching was really just going to get a good job, invest in your 401k, and, hope you've got enough money to retire at, 65 or 70, wherever the age was. And so I was on that path. And then I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that book effectively flipped a light bulb in my brain to say, wow, there's a different way to live your life. You don't have to punch a clock every day. You don't have to, help somebody else build a great business. You can go out and invest in your own business that you start. You can invest in other businesses. You can invest in real estate with this whole idea of this kind of passive income kind of mindset. So I shared the book with my wife, and I was kind of nervous that she may not feel the same instant kind of light bulb as I did. But luckily she did. And kind of, we sat down in kind of 2017, 18 and really said, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? We ended up buying an investment property in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is the opposite side of Pennsylvania. So we had a little passive income. It kind of got the juices flowing. And then I got recruited to be the head of recruitment for a wealth management firm. And I asked them, I said, hey, I've got this little LLC that I'd started a few years ago to do some side recruiting, and I'd like to still do that. They were fine with it. And so I ended up kind of just organically building the business on the side during my year plus with that wealth management firm, all with the hope that, at some point in the near future, I didn't really think it was going to be a year, but, that I would jump out and have my own firm, and then be able to not only, build a recruiting business, but also spend time investing in commercial real estate, investing in startups. And so that's what I did in January of 2020. I took the plunge. But leading up to that point, really in 2019, my wife and I made a very kind of joint kind of task or joint kind of agreement that we were going to downgrade our lifestyle, kind of condense our expenses as much as we possibly could for me to kind of take the jump, because we are both very risk averse people. And so I'm not the type of person that's just like, hey, I'm going to jump and then I will build the plane or the parachute, as I'm flying down, through the air. I'm the person that needs to build the foundation and kind of have a little bit of security before, you'd take the leap to be an entrepreneur. And so we downgraded our lifestyle. We moved in a small apartment. We had the investment property in Pittsburgh. We owned a condo in Philadelphia. We ended up renting that out. So we had two investment streams or income streams coming in. And then all of our expenses were essentially covered by my wife's salary. So even if I made $0 the first year of business, we wouldn't have to dip into savings. We could essentially just live our lives and go from there. Little did we know that COVID was going to start in 2020, and obviously the rest is history. But so from a mindset perspective, we really kind of made a joined effort to make sure we're both mentally prepared, because not only is the entrepreneur, they've got to be mentally prepared to kind of be the wake up every day and motivate yourself to, pick up the phone and cold call people or do whatever your business development activity is. But also, if you're married or you've got, a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever the case is, you've got somebody else that's a partner. Maybe they're not a partner in the business, but they are a partner in life. They've got some stress, because my wife was essentially carrying the burden to pay all of our bills, right? And so, so it was a very kind of interesting dynamic. And then COVID hit, and then obviously, we had a lot of, conversations around like, wow, this may not have been the best move, and all that fun stuff. Which COVID was bad for everybody. Not just myself. But yeah, it was a journey. It wasn't a day. It wasn't like I decided to quit on a Friday and did on a Monday. And it was definitely a process to get from, I'm going to quit my job to then quitting.
Absolutely, and it resonates also with the way I decided also to go on like kind of similar journey. And as you said, it's a process. It's not like just you click something and then it happens. Now, let's like a little bit go more deep in the hiring business that you are in now, Justin. I know you have like two, I would say, main set of customers you serve, so the startups and the private equity firms. Let's start with the private equity, because I think I didn't discuss it much. So private equity is, for people who doesn't know, are companies who mainly they invest in, like, I would say, established businesses usually, and sometimes in startup, rarely, right? But they are investment firms. Now, so what kind of, I would say, talents usually they would look for? Of course, like there are like the hardcore talents. They need to be good in finance and accountings and all this. But what are like some of the other aspect that they look in when then they want to hire someone, especially for kind of a senior role?
Yeah, so I would say working with a private equity firm, a lot of the hiring I did was really they brought me in to help their portfolio companies. So I've only filled a handful of positions for the actual private equity group, but effectively, when hiring those folks, like I was helping one of the private equity firms that I did a lot of work with hire a senior associate. So somebody that is actively sourcing deals. So these are people that are engaging and interacting with investment bankers, business owners. They're doing the kind of initial due diligence on the business that they may acquire. So they are, typically earlier in their career, they are, to your point, they understand finance, they understand how to evaluate the different financial reports from a company. They do a ton of research on the industries that they are jumping into. One of the industries they were heavily involved in was cybersecurity. So they were doing a lot of investment in cybersecurity firms. So they need to know what the competitive landscape looks like. They need to know who the big players are, because not only are private equity firms investors in companies, they're also sellers of companies, right? So they get into these businesses with the intention of holding that business, improving that business over their hold period, which is typically, a 3 to 5 year hold period, and then ultimately having an exit, right? So even when they're going into an acquisition, they are always thinking about what's their exit. And typically, some private equity firms take companies public. Some, most of them are very much focused on, okay, we're going to buy this business, and then we're going to sell it to a larger private equity firm to go from, call it a 20 million ARR mark to 50 to 100, and on and on and on. And so, or they get bought by another big company, like a strategic acquisition comes in. So these folks are very smart, very well educated. And it is a very competitive industry to get into. It's not an industry that you can kind of just fall into. Typically, you've got to go to a decent, if not really good school. A lot of them have, graduate degrees or some other certification outside of just your normal bachelor's degree. So very competitive, but you can make a ton of money if you get into the right private equity firm. And it's a really cool opportunity to not only work for a private equity company, but then you get to also interact with all the other portfolio companies that your company acquires. And if you are on the front end of that, and you're the person that identified that business as an opportunity to acquire, that's a feather in your cap, and it's a really cool opportunity. So, but the bulk of the hiring that I did for the private equity firms was essentially helping them identify talent, especially C-level talent, whether it's CEOs. Most private equity firms are going to replace or add a CFO post-acquisition. So a lot of times the acquired company does not have a massively robust FP&A group, financial planning and analysis group. They mainly have like a bookkeeper, a controller that's really focused on the blocking and tackling accounting. But when you get bought by an investment company, they are looking into the future. So yes, you need your accounting people that are looking and doing the books, but then you need the FP&A that's really forecasting, okay, if we're a SaaS business, we're an ARR driven business, if we increase our sales team, if we invested this amount of money into hiring the right people, what's our projected ARR number? What's our projected burn rate? So they're doing a lot of forecasting. So a lot of the positions that I hire are typically CFOs. I placed a CEO at a company, which was a lot of fun. So, they had a transition and needed a new CEO. But I've filled kind of everything across the board when it comes to startups, especially tech-focused startups.
Yeah, this is very common, even like in the VC space also as well. So, one of the main skills that VCs, the partners, they should know is also like get people like yourself, Justin, to be able to place right people in the startups that they have backed up. And, whether it's bringing a new CEO, sometimes after a round, maybe a major round that they have done. So, this is crucial because at the end of the day, you need to add value with with the team that you are backing up. And hiring is one of the main thing that startups are always looking for. Now, when I was preparing, I've seen something like you help startups compete against Fortune 500s for talent. What makes a startup really looks appealing for the other side to say, Justin, yeah, they are a startup, they are new, but I'm gonna take their offer and not, let's say, this big companies offer. So, what are like some of the characteristics, I would say, of that startup so they can be attractive for such talent?
I think startups have a sex appeal that big companies do, but not to the extent that a startup does. But there's also perceived higher risk for a startup. I've worked for Fortune 30 companies. I've worked for very early stage companies as a corporate employee. And obviously I support a lot of very early stage companies now with my agency. I think why a startup is kind of attractive to somebody maybe that is at a Fortune company is because Fortune 500 and very large organizations move very slowly or pivot very slowly. And so if you're in an environment and you want to go work for a company that you will have a lot more direct impact on, if you're a more junior employee, a startup is the best place to go because you're going to be able to, you only have maybe 2 or 3 different people above you to the CEO or the founder. And so you have a lot of more senior interaction. Your input is listened to by more and more people. When you're in a big company, like a Dell or a Comcast or a Facebook, you're miles away from the Zuckerbergs of the world and have very little day-to-day input in kind of the scale and the move or the growth of a company like a Facebook or any of these big companies. And so if you really want to have an impact, I think a startup is a great opportunity. The other thing is if you go into a startup versus a big company, typically if you're in a big company, you are siloed into your job. So if you're an accountant, you are only working on maybe one product line within, a large organization. If you're a software engineer, you're working on one specific product. Whereas if you're in a startup and you're a software engineer or you're a product person or you're a marketer, you are typically working across the entire portfolio or you're helping to build something new or help expand their current product. So you typically get to wear more hats, which gives you a lot more flexibility in what you do next. So, I'll use my wife as an example. So she was an HR person at a startup. She then moved into, because the startup was growing and they needed more support, she moved into a VP of operations role. So she owned HR, she owned IT. She's not a technical person, but she managed technical people. And then now she's their head of customer success, which they did not have a customer success department. She was a good employee. She's very, very smart, way smarter than I am. And so she was like, her CEO said, "Hey, we need you to build this." And so she raised her hand and said, "I'll build it." And they gave her the keys and now she's building it. So she would not have, or I would say not more likely than not, she would not have that opportunity to go from HR to ops to leading customer success in a big company, especially in a 2-year time period, right? So I think this is also important for a lot of younger folks that are just getting into their careers. If you can get into a startup, you may get in as a recruiter, you may get in as HR, you may get in as a salesperson. But if you really don't know what you want to do in your life, right? This is a great opportunity to get in and say, "Hey, I'm a salesperson, but I also like product, or maybe I'm really good at design." And so you want to become more of a marketer or a designer. You're gonna have a lot more opportunity to flex those different muscles and try different things in a startup than maybe you would in a much bigger company. So my job is to, when I'm working with these small companies, whether you're a startup or you're just a small business, is trying to share that story with potential candidates because, big companies have a big budget and they have a big brand. And so if a job opens at a Facebook or a Dell or a Comcast or whatever, people know that what those companies are. Whereas if you're a small business, they don't know who you are. So I have to almost be your salesperson to go out and virtually tap people on the shoulder, whether they're in my own network or on LinkedIn or whatever, and say, "Hey, I've got a company that you may be really interested in that could really benefit from your experience. And if you're interested, would love to, have you introduce or interview with them." So it's a big task for me to kind of go out and generate kind of the buzz. But that's what really good recruiters are there to do.
Absolutely. And it's, to your point, very like from every aspect, like it brings the freedom, it's brings the flexibility. It's very rewarding. It's very, very rewarding. Now, but of course, we know, Justin, like not all startups are created equally. And for sure, like sometimes you would need to, from your side as well, to spot like, okay, this is a good startup. And I believe you would be acting similar way, like an investor would be like looking at a startup, evaluating them, but of course from a different angle for you. So what are like some of the, I would say, checklists, or let's say like startup readiness, I don't know, like kind of check boxes that you have, and you say, like this is the kind of startups I can take it to people, as you were saying, reach out into your network on LinkedIn to tell them, hey, like this is a good startup to join. So what are like kind of your criterias?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, just who the backers are, who their investors are. So that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be this big private equity group, but
Uh-huh.
especially if there's private equity groups that I've supported in the past, And also if that private equity group has a ton of experience in that industry. So I'm helping a property technology company. This is the first time that I've worked with them. I've known them in the past, like I know who they are, and I know that they've had a lot of success in prop tech investments. So getting to know the private equity group is helpful because if they have success, if they've had a track record of success in that niche or in that industry, not a perfect predictor of future success, but a more leading indicator, as opposed to a newer private equity firm or newer investment company that is maybe pivoting into a new industry, or maybe they're newer in their just life cycle. So for me, I like to know who the backers are. I like to know who's investing, and also a little bit about the runway and why they invested, right? Because if I can understand why they're investing their hard-earned money and also their investors' money into this business, well, it makes me feel a little bit better to then, go out to candidates and say, hey, I've got this company, and, all startups are a risk. Not all startups succeed. But so that's my first kind of checkbox. And then, getting to know some of the hiring teams, hiring managers that I work with is also very important. I've really not found a hiring manager in a startup that I didn't enjoy working with. I can't say that same thing for hiring managers that I've worked with in big companies. I think some startups, you have to be a bit more gritty and you have to be open to giving people a chance. Whereas if you're in a big company, you're really trying to fit a square peg in a square hole. You need to find that perfect fit that comes in with a ton of experience. Whereas some startups that I've worked with, they're willing to hire people that have great kind of attributes, but maybe they don't have all of the years of experience that a bigger company may require. So it allows me to be a little bit more creative. And once I get to know the startup a little bit and the hiring manager or the hiring teams, I can say, hey, I've talked to this person. They're not on paper, they may not look exactly right, but I think they fit your culture. I think they fit your vision of what they want to do. They're passionate about your kind of business. And they have at least a little bit of experience in what they need. And so they can grow into the role. And startups tend to be a little bit more flexible on that, at least from my experience. So I think those are some of the key criteria that I look at. But also when I talk to candidates, I share like, hey, not every startup is created equal. Like you said, not every startup is successful. However, a lot of startups do give you some type of, equity or some type of stock options that could be real game changers financially if the company does well. And so maybe the compensation kind of total package may be a little bit different than going to a big company. But maybe the upside is a little bit better from a cash perspective, but also just from a career opportunity perspective. So those are some of the things that I kind of look at, check those boxes a little bit, and then it makes me feel more comfortable reaching out to people on behalf of one of my clients.
Completely makes sense. And I started to tell people, like, I discovered this late, by the way. I said, like, you need to have the VC mindset. And there's a book, by the way, called The VC Mindset. So because you have to do your bet. And to your point, yeah, so there are some kinds of, let's call it due diligence that people would do. But there's nothing guaranteed. And we've seen, like, even big companies, like, they have very good reputation in the market. And it happened one time to me. And, it's not like the company happened to go, but one business unit failed, right? Because it didn't go well. But anyway, so these things can happen, to your point. And again, the way you describe it is, how it is, and think about how rewarding it is. Consider the risk and then take your decision. So absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, and I think just on that point, and I think some people, and I've experienced this. So working for very big companies and very small companies, people perceive big companies as safer, as more secure in their job. And I've experienced that is not always the case, especially for private or publicly traded big companies, because if they need to make their quarter, they need to report strong numbers to the street. Their easiest thing to do is do a reorganization, using air quotes for anybody listening, a reorganization. And some people get caught up in that are really, really good employees. They've been there for a long time. Unfortunately, they may be on a product line that isn't doing as well as possible. Maybe not their fault. Maybe it is their fault. Who knows? But, so I think people look at startups as like ultra risky, which they absolutely are. but big companies are not the safe havens of never going to get laid off, never going to get fired, never going to be a good employee, but get caught up in a reduction in force or whatever. So I just, anybody listening to this, it's like weighing the option of going to a startup or going to a bigger company. If you're a dedicated, hardworking employee, a startup may be actually the better fit because you will be able to shine more than you will be at a bigger company where you're one of 100 salespeople. What if you're the one of two and you're the best salesperson? Who are they going to get rid of if there is a downturn? They're going to get rid of the other person, right? So if you
Absolutely.
bet on yourself, sometimes a startup is a better environment and theoretically a quote unquote more secure job prospect than a bigger company. So I just want to throw that out there because I've seen it on both sides. I've been involved in big companies and small, and big companies are not always the safest place to be. I mean, I get so many LinkedIn messages and LinkedIn things in my feed that they've been laid off and haven't found work in years, and all their experience is big companies. So they're very limited in their options of where to go next. Their next option is probably going to be another big company, and if big companies in their industry aren't hiring, well, then you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, right? And
Absolutely.
so anyway, there's just a lot of variables to think about when it comes to big company versus startup.
Absolutely, especially in like economic crisis times or uncertain times. Absolutely. Now let's talk about AI if we can,
Yeah,
Justin. And it's like the so
we
let
can't
me
not,
ask.
right? You've got to talk about it.
Yeah, so it has to be like even on something not related to tech, we still need to speak about AI. Now, but jokes aside, everyone's talking about AI. I had like a lot of guests also in recruitment, in HR, let's call it, and in
Yeah.
recruitment. Um, so in your opinion, what is the real value that AI really is giving us today? What's hype, and what do you think is here to stay?
Well, first of all, let me just preface this by saying I'm not an AI expert, so I don't want anybody to take this as like gospel. But
Sure.
I'll speak about kind of how I'm using it and how I think the recruitment industry and the job kind of seeker industry is kind of being helped and hurt by AI. So I'm using AI obviously in a lot of my recruitment process. A lot of the tools that I use have an AI feature to it, whether it's a better way to write an email or there's a chat bot in there where they can interact with candidates and all of that. I'm using it personally more as a thought partner. So I've got kind of my own kind of board AI that I've created where I've kind of modeled it off of a few different very prominent people, Steve Jobs and some other people, where I kind of have that as a project where I can go in and essentially talk about what I'm going through as an entrepreneur, as a leader, and have them give me some of their thoughts. Is it perfect? No. But it's a really good opportunity for me to kind of bounce ideas off of somebody that, somebody using air quotes, that is very unbiased and will tell me the truth versus trying to think through it on my own. So if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're not having kind of strategic thought partner conversations with AI, regardless of the model you use, I think that's an opportunity to really tap into as a leader. One of my buddies here in Austin, Jeff Woods, he wrote the book, The AI Driven Leader, and it really kind of flipped a switch in kind of how I think about kind of just AI and how to use it as a leader versus, kind of prompting it to write me a 3 email drip campaign to reach out to private equity firms. Everybody's doing that, and that's kind of easy. I think if you kind of think about it more as a thought partner, it can be really, really impactful for a leader. Where I think it's kind of interacting or kind of causing some issue for the job seeker and specifically also for small businesses are if you're a job seeker, if you're unemployed or looking for a job, you can hire or pay a bot to apply to jobs for you. And these bots theoretically will create unique resumes based on the job description for you and apply to all these positions. What that's doing for a job seeker, you can apply to jobs in your sleep, which theoretically is great. But what it's doing to small and mid-sized businesses that don't have massive recruitment teams internally is they are getting flooded with resumes. Most of them are either fake or they're not the right fit, and the bot is just applying because one of the keywords or one of the job's title words it matches what their client, air quotes, is looking for. So I have a client that I'm talking to. They're a small startup, well, like a mid-sized startup. Their HR person is their only HR person. They don't have a recruiter. They don't, that's the only person. She posted a mid-level job, got 2,000 applications in 24 hours and had to pull the posting down. Now, if you're an HR, VP of HR, and you're a one-person department, how are you going to sort through those 2,000 resumes and kind of come up with a short list of potential candidates that look good without spending a ton of time? And so I've actually had a lot of clients reach out to me and outsource their kind of job application process and job and applicant funneling process to me and my company, because we can kind of filter through the junk candidates. No offense to any of the candidates, but filter through the ones that aren't qualified or aren't real, and kind of provide them with a short list of, okay, of the 2,000, we, through a couple of filters and a couple of kind of pre-screening tools that we use, we can get it down to a manageable 50. And then what we will do is then we will kind of hands-on, human eyes on the resumes and say, okay, of these top 50, here are the top 10 that we are going to reach out to. Hire Tomorrow is going to reach out to have a pre-screening interview with them, make sure they're real, make sure they fit the criteria that you're looking for, and then serve you up kind of the ultimate short list of 3 to 5 candidates that at that point you should be able to go through your internal interview process and hire one of them, and you have saved a ton of time by not going through all 2,000 applications. So I think AI, like you said, I don't think AI is going anywhere. I think it's only going to get better, and I think it's here to stay. I think a lot of people are throwing AI into their product, for rightly or wrongly, and it's causing small businesses to be inundated with applications, and then they spend too much time sifting through junk resumes, people that are not qualified. And then it's a poor candidate experience for the ones that are qualified, because they're maybe waiting longer to get a response if they don't get a response. And so I think there's just a little bit of we're in this weird period of AI where everybody knows it's the future. Everybody's putting in a lot of investment. A lot of VCs are investing in a ton of AI companies. And so it's just a matter of the small businesses aren't equipped to pull in AI or use the AI tools that they need, because they're time constrained, they're capacity constrained. They just don't have the resources internally like a big Fortune 500 company does to test out different tools, because there's 1,000,001 recruitment AI tools out there. I get inundated with messages with, hey, we can help save you hours of time or whatever by our AI recruiter. And I've done some demos, and some of them are okay. Some of them still have a long way to go. But for the clients that I work with, specifically the small businesses, they are getting overwhelmed with applications. They don't know who's real, who's not. And so it's just causing them even more problems in hiring than when they were getting too few. There's a good balance of, okay, what's quality applications versus quantity. And I would rather have quality than quantity.
Do you think, Justin, based on what you mentioned, and of course, this is what I heard from a lot of people in the field like yourself, do you think that AI exposed some of the weaknesses in the process itself? I mean, having a job link, people will, because this is what's happening even before AI, right? And
Yep.
we used to have the ATS systems, the automatic scoring systems trying to do this. But do you think like we have now the urge to fundamentally change maybe the process? I don't know. Of course, we're gonna still use CVs. I don't know for how long, but as long as we are trying to summarize someone's experience into like 2 pages or 3 pages and get someone, I'm not sure. I might think out loud with you and say, hey, like we can directly, get an AI to interview them. But we started to see also these videos where they are tricking the AI. So where are we heading? Do you think like the job is becoming harder because of this? Or are you optimistic and you say like, no, like probably there will be some tools that will eliminate these, okay, quote unquote, junk, candidates that are coming just for the sake of, maybe they are vibe, because this is the word now, vibe coding, vibe
Yeah.
marketing. I heard it somewhere the other day, like vibe applying to jobs. So
Yeah. I think because applicant tracking solutions are still can't parse a resume correctly. So if you've ever applied to a job and you've uploaded your resume and it says parse, that means essentially it's looking at your application and trying to pull out your key information and put it into their system. But how many times have you applied to a job, put your resume in there, it parses, and then you have to go answer, what's your name, where did you work, what's your job title, how long were you there, what's your education? So effectively, they're still not able to do that. So I think the applicant tracking system has a long way to go, because even these big companies like Workday, you still have to, the parsing is not perfect. And that's probably because the every resume is not uniform, right? You're not using the same format. You're not using the same text and bullets and picture. Some people put pictures, some people put PD, so it's a very, for whatever reason, people haven't been able to solve that problem. So I think AI will help to make that process easier. And the other thing I will say is, if you're a candidate and let's say you're not using a bot, and you're applying to jobs on your own, you should not have any reason to have any grammatical or spelling or formatting errors on your resume, because you can put it into a chat GPT or some other large language model and say, please check this for grammar, spelling, formatting, and spits you out a very nice, uniform, perfect resume. So if you're not using AI, if you're going to use AI for one thing, if you're a job candidate, please just make sure your resume looks, feels perfect. Because the last thing you want is to have a recruiter that looks at it and says, well, your formatting is off, and maybe you're supposed to be a very detail-oriented person, and that just shows that you're not ultra detail-oriented. So, but I think will it cause a fundamental shift in how the process happens? Potentially, but not yet. Because think about, yes, big companies may be leveraging AI. They may be bringing in, agentic agents to kind of replace the initial recruiting process. What's that? 1% of all companies? Think of the HVAC company that, comes out and fixes your air conditioning unit. Are they using AI to screen applicants? Maybe not, right? And so I think it's going to be just like any kind of technology. We're in this massive hype phase where everybody is like, we got to use it. And if you're not talking about AI and you're not using it, then you're falling behind, which potentially is true. But I don't think that if you implement it haphazardly, it's just like any piece of technology. If you don't implement it correctly, it's not going to be as efficient as it should be. So I could probably talk more about this, but I think the summary is, I think AI is here to stay. I think AI ultimately, it makes my life easier. It's making other people's lives harder because maybe they haven't set up their internal systems and processes correctly. Again, going back to, they're not experts in it. They don't have the time to do it. They've got other things that are more, quote unquote, more important. So there's a little bit of a long way to go. But just one thing to touch on I saw a post the other day about somebody posted about their experience being interviewed by an AI bot. And that person that was interviewed thought it was pretty clunky, but not as terrible as they thought. And then some people in the comments were like, I automatically reject an interview from an AI bot because they feel that the company that uses an AI bot for their initial round of interviews does not put enough weight or enough kind of investment in the candidates. So they're like, I'm just not doing it. And I thought that was an interesting take on, you're essentially saying any company that's using an AI interviewer that you're not interested because you don't feel like they're putting enough weight on the actual interview process, which I can't disagree with. I don't necessarily wholeheartedly agree, but I think there is something there where there is probably a subset of people that just don't want to and will not, at least at the current moment, have an AI bot interview you or interview them for a job. And the other thing that I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on is AI. You can train an AI to ask specific questions on an interview, right? Like you can give them questions they have to ask. What you can't solve for, at least not yet, and I've asked a few AI companies this, how do you solve for somebody that a human shares information on that interview that could be perceived as discriminatory, and the
Mhm.
AI bot has copied all of that text down and they put it in their system of record? Well, now if that person sues the company because they felt like they were discriminated against because the bot decided they weren't the right fit, well, then you just open yourself up to a massive lawsuit. So like we've already seen some, I think Workday had an article out there that they were being sued because their AI, screening process was discriminatory against age. But I think there's a little bit of things that may come out if there are some things where you can't prevent a human from sharing what they're going to share, right? And any recruiter listening to this, we sometimes become, for whatever reason, therapists. People will share things with me they should never share, and I don't know why they do, but they feel like I'm a nice person. Maybe they like my voice. I don't know. And they feel like they can share stuff. But if they're sharing that with a bot, well, that bot is capturing every piece of information and remembers every piece of information, right? Like I don't remember everything, but a bot
Right.
will remember everything. So I didn't mean to go on a soapbox moment there, but I think let me just summarize. There's a lot of opportunity with AI in recruitment. I think we're kind of in the first inning of probably 9 or more innings. And so I think I'm excited about the opportunities that it'll afford. I think there's still some kinks that need to be worked out to make it a little bit more efficient for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think, recruiting, same as sales, same like other fields, they are so human in nature. And I
Yep.
think, the other day, I think someone was saying like some of the jobs that will disappear. And we agreed that, recruitment is like the recruiter job will not disappear. And the simple reason is because me as a candidate, I cannot reach by myself to all the places that I want to, because the power of a recruiter, and correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, is your network, like how much people you know, and because it's relation at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think AI is still not able to replace this relation between us humans. Same apply in sales. Yeah, like I can ask, AI to do some prospecting for me. I mean, just research, preparing list, but I have to go and do the job, right, to sell the technology itself, because there are like some human aspects that I don't think it will disappear. But yeah, AI will amplify, let's say, the way we work. We become maybe more efficient. So maybe from recruitment perspective, the cycles, or like, the time to close a position will shrink, from couple of months probably maybe to couple of weeks, because we can do things faster. Yeah, so absolutely on this. As we are coming close to an end, Justin, just I have one question which I just figured out now, that you also host a podcast.
Yep.
What is it about, and how much it help you in finding clients and like growing your network? Because I was just mentioning about the network.
Yeah, no. So the podcast is called Growth Capital Podcast. Essentially, I interview startup founders, CEOs of mid-sized private equity-backed companies, and then I interview people from the kind of private equity and venture capital world. So the people that are kind of do the investing. And so it's only been around since November, so less than a year. It's a great opportunity for me I've interviewed some of my candidates that I've placed, which has been a lot of fun.
Nice.
I've interviewed some of the CEOs that I've worked with and actually hired people underneath them. And so for me, it's an opportunity to get deeper into the ecosystem that I'm trying to build. And so it's generated some additional. It's an opportunity for me to reach out to potential clients, private equity companies, CEOs, and instead of selling them, hey, I work with a recruiting company, here's what I do, I can say, hey, would love to share your story on the podcast. And the podcast is very similar to this. It's a conversation. I'm not selling what I do. Obviously, we talk a little bit about talent because, like we've talked about in this show, as you're scaling a business, you need to do that via people and technology. And so I help on the people side. So I've enjoyed it. I had a podcast a few years ago on commercial real estate because I was doing a ton of commercial real estate investing, and that was fun at the time. But I'm very passionate about helping companies find the right talent, and it's a reward for me when I get brought into a company and they say, we've had this job open for 1, 2, 5, 10 months, whatever the time frame is. We haven't found the right fit, and then I'm able to identify the right people, get them in the interview process, and they ultimately hire one. And then I get to kind of see the success, because a lot of times in the startup world, if I can place a CFO or a head of sales or marketing at a company, odds are they're going to be at a new company in the next 2 to 3 years, because the company that they're at will sell. Maybe they'll not be doing as well, so they'll jump to a new company. And then, to your point about network, I'm able to then say, hey, I placed you at this company. How are things going? Haven't talked to you in a few months. Like, let's catch up. And, then I've got maybe a new client. So the podcast has been a lot of fun for me. I interview people all day for my recruiting job. So the podcast is just an interview that's recorded and shared with the world. So, it's a little bit easier for me to kind of jump into that. So it's been a lot of fun for sure.
Great. And I suggest all the audience to go and check it, because I love these kinds of podcasts. Like, they are similar to mine, not because I do it this way, but they are more genuine. They build great audience as well, and you can have great conversation. And honestly, the biggest thing, for me at least, is I learn a lot from my guests also as well. Like, of course, to your point, people ask me like, how much money do you do with the podcast? I said, guys, it's not like about the money. I don't do money from the podcast, but the network that I gained podcasting, I say to people, you can't put a price tag next to it. So it's, of course, like, I had visibility, I had other opportunities outside of the podcast, but yeah, like, the network effect that it created for me is priceless, I would say.
Yep.
So I'll ask people to check it. So Justin, if people want to get in touch or like learn more, how they can reach out?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of networking on LinkedIn, so check me out on LinkedIn, or if you want to reach out to me, my website is Hire Tomorrow, HIRE tomorrow.com, and my email is just jdixon, DIXON, @hiretomorrow.com. Any of those will land in my inbox, and would be happy to connect with anybody. If they are looking for a job, I'm happy to help in any way that I possibly can, or if they're looking to hire, obviously can help on that front as well.
Great. Again, Justin, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with me today. I learned a lot, and great insights from your side, I would say. And this is how I end my episodes as usual. So first, before I forget, all the links that Justin mentioned will be available in the show notes. So if you are listening on your favorite podcasting app, you will find them in the show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will find them in the description. And as I say, this is how I end. If you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. If you enjoyed, please give me a favor, subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming again and again, the fans, the audience, thank you very much for all what you're doing to the show this year. I'm speechless. I'm repeating myself, but before, couple of months, I start to see a trend. Like, we are like increasing the audience day by the day. But recently, in the past few months, and especially now in July, we are trending in the top 200 Apple Podcast charts in multiple countries. So it used to be 1, 2. Now we are in 8 countries. I'm hoping for touching the 10 very soon. But this cannot happen without you, the audience, without your support, without, your suggestions. And of course, all my guests, you included Justin, because without my guests, I couldn't do this. So thank you very much. And as I say, always stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.